The city slept, but something watching from the snow was wide awake. A man scarred by duty. A puppy too broken to bark. Between them, an unspoken bond and a secret powerful enough to rewrite what it means to be human. Nothing about this night is coincidence. Stay to the final moment, share where you're watching from, and hit like and subscribe, because when the truth comes, you'll wish it wasn't real. Christmas Eve blanketed Brooklyn in white, the kind of heavy, breathless snow that silences everything. Traffic footsteps, even memory. Colt Mercer, a 52-year-old white veteran, limped down a narrow street near Flatbush Avenue, his cane tapping against the frozen sidewalk like a metronome of pun. The cold gnawed at his joints, but he didn't mind. Pain reminded him he was still here. After years in uniform and another decade of trying to remember how to be human, pain was familiar company. The city glittered in patches of gold and blue from Christmas lights strung across storefronts, but to Colt, it all looked hollow. He'd spent the evening volunteering at a small church shelter, serving soup, and handing out blankets to men whose eyes told stories just like his of things seen and never forgotten. When the doors finally closed, he stayed behind to sweep the floor. The younger volunteers had gone home to families. Colt had only the echo of his own footsteps. He locked the door behind him and stepped into the storm carrying a grocery bag with leftover sandwiches he hadn't had the heart to throw away. The wind bit through his army jacket, snapping at his scarf. Every Christmas since his wife and son died in a car accident 8 years ago felt like a battle he never trained for. He'd survived gunfire explosions the desert sun, but not the quiet that followed coming home. The street stretched long and deserted. A flickering lamppost buzzed overhead. Somewhere in the distance, a street saxophone played Silent Night off-key. Colt smiled faintly at the irony. The snow crunched beneath his boots, white flakes clinging to the edges of his short beard. He passed a glowing bakery window, its warmth spilling onto the street, and glanced inside, families laughing over cocoa children tugging at scarves. He turned away quickly. Happiness once lost was hard to watch. He cut into a familiar shortcut, an alley between a shuttered bookstore and a restaurant dumpster. It smelled of grease cardboard and rust. He'd taken it for years on his way home, though tonight it felt different. The kind of stillness that carried a hum, a sound. He paused. The wind rustled through torn posters on the wall, but beneath it came a whimper, faint, rhythmic, fragile. He frowned, eyes scanning the shadows. Probably just a rat, he muttered, though his instincts told him otherwise. Combat had taught him to listen when something didn't fit. He took a few slow steps, peering behind the overflowing trash bins. Then he saw it. Curled up in a dented cardboard box lay a tiny puppy, its fur matted with grime and snow ribs pressing through its thin frame. The creature trembled violently, one paw scraped raw and bleeding. It tried to lift its head but couldn't. Colt froze. For a moment, all he could hear was the weak wheeze of its breathing and the distant hiss of falling snow. His throat tightened. He hadn't felt compassion this sharp in years. It hurt more than the cold. "Hey there, little one," he said softly, crouching down despite the protest in his knee. The puppy whimpered, eyes half open, glazed with exhaustion. There was a scrap of cardboard beside it, scrawled in fading marker. "Don't hurt him. He didn't do anything." Colt swallowed hard. "Who'd leave you out here?" he whispered. He extended a hand slowly, letting the pup sniff his glove. Its nose twitched once, then it collapsed back onto the cardboard. Colt's chest ached. He slipped off his coat, wrapping the trembling body gently. The puppy's heartbeat was faint but steady, a fragile drum of life refusing to quit. He pressed it close to his chest, feeling its warmth seep into him like a memory he didn't know he'd missed. "You're coming with me, soldier," he murmured. "Can't leave you to freeze." A sudden sound broke the moment, the sharp crunch of footsteps behind him. Colt turned, scanning the alley. The lamplight caught the edge of a moving shadow. Someone stood at the far end, half hidden beneath the falling snow, watching. The figure didn't move closer. Colt straightened, slowly, gripping his cane like a weapon. "Can I help you?" he called out. Silence. Then the figure stepped back, disappearing into the dark. The alley was empty again. Colt waited, every muscle tense, the old soldier's alertness flickering back to life. After a long minute, he turned away, tightening his hold on the bundled puppy. He walked home faster now, glancing over his shoulder once, twice. The streets were empty, the snowfall heavier. When he reached the corner, he ducked beneath a flickering streetlight and looked down at the puppy's small face. It had drifted into shallow sleep, nose pressed against his chest, breath warm against the fabric of his shirt. "You're safe now," he whispered. "We'll find you some food, get you cleaned up." For a moment, something inside him eased. He'd thought the world had forgotten how to surprise him, but here it was, a tiny heartbeat, thawing something frozen in his soul. As he approached his apartment building, a gust of wind howled through the street, carrying with it a faint echo, or maybe just his imagination of another pair of footsteps fading into the storm. Colt didn't look back. He was too tired, too cold, and too focused on keeping the fragile life in his arms alive. Inside the coat, the puppy stirred weakly and gave a small, broken whine. "It's all right, kid," he murmured. "You're not alone tonight." He reached his building, pushed open the creaking door, and stepped into the dim warmth of the lobby. The faint hum of an old radiator filled the air. Snow dripped from his coat, forming tiny puddles on the floor. He didn't care. For the first time in years, he felt something beyond loneliness responsibility. Upstairs, his apartment waited small, bare, a single lamp still burning by the window. He laid the puppy gently on an old wool blanket near the heater, kneeling beside it as he peeled off his wet gloves. Its tiny chest rose and fell uneven, but steady. Colt sat there for a long while, watching, listening. The city outside kept snowing, muffling the world. He thought about the figure in the alley, about the sign, about how this little creature ended up there. But for tonight, questions could wait. "We'll figure it out tomorrow," he whispered. "Tonight you rest." The puppy's paw twitched in sleep, as if reaching for something unseen. Colt smiled faintly. "You're tougher than you look, kid." Morning came gray and heavy over Brooklyn, the kind of dawn that seeps in through blinds like cold smoke. Colt Mercer hadn't slept. He sat slouched in the armchair beside the heater cane, leaning against the wall, eyes locked on the tiny creature wrapped in his old wool blanket. The puppy had made it through the night, barely. Every so often, it whimpered in its sleep pause, twitching like it was running from something. Colt knew that feeling. He'd run in his sleep for years, chasing ghosts that always vanished at dawn. He reached for his coffee now, cold, and took a sip just to stay awake. "You're still breathing, kid," he murmured, voice cracked from fatigue. "Guess we both got lucky." The room was quiet, except for the hum of the radiator and the steady rhythm of two damaged hearts trying to trust the morning. Colt leaned forward gently, peeling back the jacket wrapped around the pup. The sight made his stomach twist. The wound on its paw wasn't just a scrape. It was deep, jagged, almost like it had been caught in wire or bitten. But worse was the bruise along its side, a purplish mark hidden under the dirty fur. Someone had kicked this animal hard. He swallowed back anger that rose too easily these days. "Some bastard did this to you," he muttered. The puppy stirred, opening one groggy eye, and made a faint sound that wasn't quite a bark. Colt smiled sadly. "You remind me of the mutts we had overseas. Scared, but still trying." He moved carefully to fill a bowl with water and tore a slice of bread into tiny pieces soaked in milk. The pup sniffed once, then began to eat slow, trembling bites like it didn't believe it was safe yet. Watching it eat stirred something deep inside Colt, a quiet ache that had nothing to do with loneliness. It was the feeling of being needed again. He hadn't realized how much he missed that. Outside, the storm had eased. The streets glistened, a thin layer of slush reflecting the pale winter light. Colt wrapped himself in his coat, leaving the puppy sleeping near the heater. He needed antiseptic bandages, dog food, anything to keep the little one alive. He scribbled a quick note on a torn receipt. "I'll be back. Stay warm." The words looked strange in his handwriting, like they belonged to a man who still believed in promises. He locked the door behind him and headed down the icy stairs. The neighborhood was waking slowly. A shopkeeper shoveled snow from his doorway. A bus hissed past, leaving dirty spray in its wake. A church bell rang somewhere down the block. Normal sounds, but Colt couldn't shake the unease clinging to him. Since the night before. He glanced behind him more than once. Maybe it was habit soldiers didn't like blind corners. Or maybe it was the way he'd felt watched in that alley, that presence just out of sight. He pushed the thought aside. PTSD, that's all he told himself. Brains that survive war keep seeing danger long after it's gone. He found a small corner store with a faded sign that read, "Pet and Feed." Inside smelled of hay and detergent. A middle-aged man behind the counter looked up half asleep. Colt bought a tin of wet dog food disinfectant spray and a roll of gauze. As the man rang him up, Colt asked casually, "You ever see anyone around here messing with strays?" The man raised an eyebrow. "Strays? You mean that pack that hangs by the docks?" "Yeah, they go missing sometimes. Heard there's been people catching them dog fights or something. Cops don't do much." Colt felt the air in his lungs freeze. "Kids mostly?" "Nah," the man said. "Adults. Rough ones. One guy comes by now and then, tall dark coat, doesn't talk much. Creeps everyone out." Colt nodded, slowly paid and left. Back at the apartment building, his boots left trails of wet snow on the stairs. When he reached his floor, something made him pause. His door was closed just as he left it, but there was something wedged beneath it, a folded piece of paper. His gut tightened. He picked it up, unwrapped it, and the smell hit first metallic sharp. The paper was streaked with something dark, almost dry blood. In the center, scrawled in uneven letters, were 3 words. "You shouldn't have." Colt stared at it for a long moment, the world narrowing to the edges of that note. He didn't hear the neighbor's radio, didn't feel the draft sneaking through the hallway cracks. His instincts clicked back into soldier mode. He checked the stairwell, listened for movement, saw nothing. Then he went inside, closing the door behind him quietly. The puppy was awake, head lifting weakly, as Colt entered. It gave a tiny wag of its tail, then winced when its paw brushed the floor. "It's okay," Colt said softly, crouching beside it. His heart was still pounding. He pocketed the note for now. There'd be time to deal with it later. He opened the tin of food, spooned some onto a plate, and slid it toward the pup. The small creature devoured it, licking every corner. Colt let out a shaky laugh. "Guess that answers if you're staying." He cleaned the wound again, sprayed the disinfectant, and wrapped it carefully in gauze. The pup didn't fight, just watched him with eyes too old for its size. "We'll get you strong again," he said quietly. "Then maybe figure out who the hell's leaving me blood-stained love notes." As daylight faded, Colt pulled a chair to the window, watching the snow fall in slow spirals. The city looked calm, but he'd seen calm before the firefight too many times to believe it. He reached down, scratching the puppy's chin. "Your trouble, I can feel it," he whispered. "But I guess I've had worse company." The puppy tilted its head as if understanding. Outside, a car idled too long before pulling away. Colt's eyes narrowed. He watched until the taillights disappeared down the block. The note burned in his pocket, heavier than paper should be. "Hey there, Ranger," Colt murmured, his voice rough from a night of half-sleep. He hadn't meant to name him, but the name had slipped out during the night when he caught the pup shivering against his boot. Now it stuck. The dog blinked at him, with those same amber eyes, fragile but determined. Colt stretched his old bones, popping, then rubbed his face with both hands. He had dreamed again the desert. The radio crackled the explosion that left his left ear ringing even now. But for the first time in years, the dream had ended differently. Instead of silence afterward, he had heard a faint whimper that pulled him back. It was this dog's whimper, echoing through memory like a second chance. He reached for his cane and stood. The air in the apartment felt stale thick with last night's unease. The bloody note still sat folded on the counter exactly where he'd left it. Colt eyed it for a long moment before turning back to the pup. "Let's get that bandage checked, huh?" he said quietly. Ranger wagged his tail, once the sound soft as paper brushing wood. Colt knelt beside him, unwinding the gauze with slow, careful movements. The wound looked cleaner, but something caught his attention, something metallic, glinting faintly near the cut. He frowned, picking at the edge until a thin, cold object slid free from the folds of cloth. It wasn't part of the dressing. It was a small metal tag no bigger than a coin, stamped with a series of tiny numbers and letters. Colt's stomach tightened. He hadn't seen it last night. His pulse quickened as his mind ran through possibilities. He had locked the door. He had checked every window. No one could have come in. Yet there it was sewn neatly under a layer of gauze, as if placed there on purpose. "What the hell is this?" he muttered. Ranger tilted his head, whining softly. Colt turned the tag over, running his thumb across the markings. They weren't random. They looked military-structured, formatted. Familiar. A call sign maybe, or coordinates. Old instinct stirred deep in his chest. He hadn't felt this sharp, this alert since the war. Someone had been in his apartment. Someone who knew exactly what they were doing. He stood abruptly scanning the room. Everything looked untouched, the couch, the photo frame, the window latch, but the air felt wrong. He walked to the door, checked the lock. Still latched. Checked the windows. Closed tight. He moved through every corner of the small space, the rhythm of his cane echoing off the walls. No sign of forced entry, no footprints on the floor. Just him and the puppy. Still, he could feel it, the subtle chill of violation, the invisible fingerprint of someone else's presence. He turned back toward Ranger, who sat watching him, ears perked, as if sensing the same unease. "You didn't imagine that, did you?" Colt said softly. The pup gave a faint whine. "Yeah," he sighed, rubbing his temple. "Didn't think so." He slipped the metal tag into his pocket and started pacing. The note. The wound. The tag. This was no coincidence. The dog wasn't just an abandoned stray. Someone had marked it, hidden something inside, then come looking for it. And now that someone knew where Colt lived, he stopped pacing and stared at the window blinds, the faint shapes moving beyond them. The city felt too quiet. He could almost feel eyes on him. Ranger barked suddenly, a sharp sound that startled the silence. Colt crouched beside him, calming him with a steady hand. "It's all right, soldier. You're safe here." But even as he said it, he didn't believe it. Hours passed. Colt busied himself with small tasks, reheating coffee, mending an old glove, cleaning the bandage again, but his mind never stopped spinning. He tried to recall those stamped numbers, repeating them silently like a code. 3 digits, a hyphen, 2 letters. It meant something. His service years taught him patterns mattered. Late afternoon light seeped through the window, soft and gold, turning the room warmer than it felt. Ranger slept on a pillow near the heater paws, twitching in dream motion. Colt finally decided to step outside for air. He needed to clear his head, maybe visit the police about the note, though he doubted they'd care. Homeless vet finds a hurt dog, gets weird mail, no case in that. But his gut said something bigger was brewing. He pulled on his coat, pocketed the metal tag, and stepped into the hallway. The faint hum of a neighbor's TV floated through the thin walls. He took the stairs slowly, knee stiff but functional, and stepped out into the brittle chill of dusk. The street was quiet, too quiet for Brooklyn. Across the road, a white van sat parked, engine running, exhaust curling lazily into the air. Its windows were tinted dark. Colt hesitated, pretending to adjust his scarf, while watching the vehicle from the corner of his eye. Then he saw it through the windshield, a figure sitting motionless in the driver's seat. The same build, same coat as the one he'd seen in the alley 2 nights ago. His heart kicked hard against his ribs. He turned casually, walking toward the corner store instead of home. The van's engine revved softly, but didn't move. Colt reached the corner, pretended to check his phone, then glanced back. The van was still there, lights dim, watching. He slipped into the shop, breathing slower, now soldier mode, engaged again. He bought nothing, just waited near the window, observing. After a minute, the van pulled away, tires crunching on snow, disappearing down the block. Colt exhaled. "All right," he whispered to himself. "We're in it now." He returned home, locking the door behind him twice this time. Ranger barked when he entered, ears twitching. Colt crouched and held him close, feeling the small chest rising and falling fast. "We got company, buddy," he said quietly. "Whoever's after you isn't giving up." He pulled the metal tag from his pocket, turning it under the light again. The numbers gleamed faintly, 47 KL 92. He grabbed his old service laptop from the closet, powered it on, and typed the code into a search program he still had from his Army days. The system recognized the format immediately. It was a unit identifier, a decommissioned military logistics code. But what would that be doing on a dog's tag? He leaned back, staring at the screen. His pulse slowed into a steady rhythm of clarity, the calm before a mission. Someone was moving military information through living couriers, and that puppy had somehow slipped through the cracks. The metal tag still lay on the table, the faint markings catching the orange glow of the streetlight through the blinds. Ranger had fallen asleep beside the heater, curled up with the kind of trust only the innocent have left. But when Colt's eyes snapped open just after dawn, the air felt wrong again, too quiet. Too still, the kind of silence that screamed of intrusion. He blinked once, rubbed the sleep from his face, and reached for the edge of the blanket beside him. It was empty. His pulse stumbled. "Ranger?" he called softly, his voice cracking against the cold. No movement. The heater hummed, the kettle sat untouched, and the bowl of water still shimmered faintly under the light. Colt pushed himself up of his cane, clattering against the floor as he limped toward the door. It was still locked chain in place. His stomach dropped. He turned to the window, and that's when he saw it. The latch was off by an inch, snow blown in across the sill. His heartbeat thundered. He crossed the room, shoved the curtains aside, and stared at the prints leading across the frost-covered ledge. Tiny paw marks, spaced unevenly, heading toward the roof of the adjacent building. "No," he whispered, gripping the frame so tight his knuckles blanched. "Not you too?" He shoved the window higher and climbed through into the bitter morning air. The roof was slick with ice. Each step cracked beneath his boots. He followed the prints, small, delicate, the imprints of a creature too weak to be moving in this cold. The trail stopped near a rusted ventilation duct. That's when he heard a muffled whine. Colt crouched and peered behind the metal grate. Ranger was there, huddled against the vent, trembling but alive. Colt exhaled hard, the relief dizzying. "Hey, buddy," he murmured, voice low but tender. "How'd you get up here?" But before he reached for the pup, he saw something else, a small scrap of black tape near the vent, its edge sticky with a faint fiber clinging to it. He touched it carefully. It wasn't ordinary tape. It looked tactical, the kind used by field operatives to attach micro-devices. Someone had been here. Someone had taken the dog out, left him alive, and disappeared before dawn. The anger that spread through Colt's veins was cold and surgical. He lifted Ranger into his jacket and glanced around. The rooftops stretched endless under the pale sky chimneys, coughing smoke pigeons cooing on ledges. Nothing moved until a sound behind him made his blood run cold. Footsteps. Slow, deliberate, confident. Colt turned his breath, forming clouds in the air. A tall man in a dark coat stepped from behind a water tank face half covered by a black scarf. The same outline from the van, the same stillness from the alley. "You've got something that doesn't belong to you," the man said, his tone calm, but edged with command. Colt's stance stiffened, weight shifting onto his good leg. "You break into my place, you steal a dog, then bring him up here. You've got nerve." The man's head tilted slightly. "Walk away, Mercer. You don't know what you've picked up." Colt's pulse spiked at the sound of his name. "So you know me," he said evenly. "That's good. Then you know I don't walk away from things like this." The man sighed, as though disappointed. "We warned the last handler too. He didn't listen either." Colt felt the chill of those words crawl across his spine. "Last handler," he repeated. "You mean whoever had this dog before?" The man didn't answer directly, but his eyes flicked briefly toward Ranger, now squirming faintly in Colt's jacket. He was useful, the stranger said, until he wasn't. Colt shifted, positioning himself between the man and the edge of the roof. He was unarmed except for his cane, but that had never stopped him before. "If you came for the tag, you're too late," Colt said, his voice low, precise. "You won't find it." The man smirked under the scarf. "Then you'll die protecting a mistake." He moved fast, reaching under his coat, but Colt was faster than his limp suggested. Years of muscle memory took over. He swung his cane in a sharp arc, striking the man's wrist, sending whatever he was holding skidding across the ice. The man cursed, lunging forward, but Colt drove his shoulder into him with the force of an avalanche. They stumbled, boots scraping against the slick surface, hands grasping for balance. Ranger barked from inside the jacket, a frantic sound that cut through the cold like alarm bells. The man regained footing and shoved Colt hard against the ledge. The drop below yawned open 4 stories to the asphalt. Colt's fingers scraped the brick edge as the man pressed in closer. "You don't know what's inside that dog," he hissed. "You have no idea what's coming." Colt met his eyes, gray sharp, empty. "Try me," he growled. Then he swung the cane again, this time catching the man's jaw. The stranger staggered back, lost balance on the ice, and fell hard against the roof's edge. Colt didn't wait to see if he'd recover. He grabbed Ranger and limped toward the hatch leading down to the stairwell. His heart hammered against his ribs. He reached the bottom of the stairwell and slammed the door shut, dragging a metal crate in front of it. Ranger whimpered softly against his chest. "You all right, soldier?" Colt asked between breaths. The puppy gave a faint yelp in reply. Colt exhaled hard sweat, cooling fast on his skin despite the cold air. His knee screamed, but he didn't stop until he was back inside the apartment door, bolted curtains drawn. Only then did he let the panic settle into thought. "The last handler," he whispered. Who was he? He moved to the table, unrolled the metal tag again, and studied the numbers. That code, 47KL92. It had to mean something specific. Maybe the tag wasn't just identification. Maybe it was access. He pulled out his laptop, logged into the encrypted database he hadn't used since his discharge, and searched for the unit ID. The screen flickered lines of data scrolling before landing on a name he hadn't heard in years: Captain Miles Rourke. Colt froze. Rourke had been his commanding officer during the final tour in Helmand Province. The report next to his name was short and grim: deceased fire incident storage facility, classified cargo. But Rourke had always been the kind of man who didn't die easily. Colt's pulse quickened. "The last handler," he murmured. "You were talking about him." He looked down at Ranger, whose eyes met his with weary trust. "And you kid you were part of whatever Rourke was protecting?" The realization hit hard and cold. Rourke must have hidden something: data evidence inside the one thing no one would search a stray dog. And somehow that animal had ended up in Colt's alley. It wasn't chance. It was a trail. A message. Maybe even a call for help sent too late. Colt rubbed a hand across his face, exhaustion catching up to adrenaline. Outside, the wind howled harder, rattling the glass. He thought of the man's warning and the way he said it. Not like a threat, but a prophecy. "You'll end up like the last handler." The words lingered like frostbite. Colt reached for the handgun locked in the drawer beside his chair, an old service piece he hadn't touched in years, and checked the chamber. Loaded. The weight of it felt both foreign and familiar. "All right, Miles?" he muttered under his breath. "I guess you passed the torch." Colt hadn't spoken to anyone since the rooftop fight. The man's warning looped in his head like a radio signal stuck between frequencies. "You'll end up like the last handler." He knew what it meant now. Miles Rourke, his old commanding officer, hadn't died in a random fire. He'd been silenced. And whatever Rourke had hidden, it was now in Colt's apartment, wrapped inside a shivering dog. The metal tag glinted under the lamplight, its stamped code like a whisper only soldiers could read. Colt reached for it, running his thumb along the ridges. 47KL92, he murmured. He'd spent the afternoon digging through old databases on his encrypted drive, and now he finally had something solid. The tag's code wasn't just a unit number, it was a cipher key. Each digit matched a set of coordinates once used by military storage divisions. When he overlaid the data on an old topographical map, the numbers pointed to a location 2 hours north of the city, deep inside the woods near Coldbrook. An old logistics yard had stood there before the Army shut it down 15 years ago. The records labeled it as decommissioned, but Colt had learned long ago that nothing truly decommissioned stayed quiet forever. He stared at the coordinates for a long time, feeling that old tingle of mission adrenaline stirring in his blood. He'd tried to live like a civilian, but it was like asking a wolf to forget the taste of winter. He looked down at Ranger, who stirred slightly in his sleep. "Looks like we've got a road trip, kid," he said softly. "But first we get you checked out. No more bleeding, no more cold." He reached for the jacket on the chair and slid the pistol into his belt holster. His knee still throbbed from the rooftop struggle, but the pain grounded him. Pain was truth. It meant he was still in the fight. Outside, the streets were quieter than usual, as if the city itself sensed the storm about to break. Colt bundled Ranger into his coat and stepped out into the hallway. The air smelled faintly of mildew and radiator steam. A woman from 2B peeked out of her door and nodded politely the way New Yorkers do when they see something they don't want to understand. Colt nodded back, pushing into the cold night. The wind sliced across his face, the kind of cold that carried memory. He stopped by a payphone. His phone had been buzzing with unknown numbers all day, and he wasn't going to make the mistake of answering. He called an old contact from his service days, a hacker named Deacon, who owed him more than one favor. "Need a vehicle unregistered, no questions," Colt said when Deacon answered. "Something that can handle back roads." Deacon grunted. "Jesus, Colt, you always call when there's smoke." Colt smiled thinly. "You're not wrong." He hung up and started back toward the building, the weight of the pistol pressing against his side. When he reached the front step, he froze. Something was off again. The faint flicker of light against the stairwell wall, the scent of gasoline in the air. His instincts screamed before his mind caught up. He sprinted up the stairs, Ranger whining in his arms. The corridor glowed orange before he reached the top. His apartment door was ajar, and firelight danced through the gap. He kicked it open, coughing as a wall of smoke rushed out. Flames licked the curtains, devouring the edges of the table where the laptop had been. The metal tag was still there on the counter, half buried under a melting plastic casing. Colt lunged forward, snatched it, and shoved it into his coat pocket. The heat scorched his knuckles. Behind him, something cracked a ceiling beam, giving way. Ranger barked sharply, pawing at his chest. I know. Colt rasped, eyes watering from the smoke. He turned toward the window, coughing violently. The hallway was already a tunnel of fire. The only way out was down. He smashed the window with his cane shard, spraying into the snow below. The drop wasn't far, maybe 10 feet to the fire escape, but the metal rungs were slick with frost. He slung Ranger against his chest, muttered a curse, and climbed through. The air outside hit him like a knife, sharp and clean compared to the furnace behind him. He descended slowly, one hand gripping the icy railing boots, slipping. Behind him, glass shattered, and something heavy collapsed inside the apartment. By the time his feet hit the alley, his lungs burned from smoke and cold. He stumbled, fell to one knee, and stayed there for a moment, clutching Ranger tight. The puppy coughed once, a weak sound that terrified him more than the flames. "You're okay, soldier," he whispered hoarsely. "Breathe." Ranger wheezed again, then drew in a thin, shaky breath. Colt exhaled. "That's it. That's my boy." He looked up, watching, as black smoke billowed out of the upper windows, curling against the night sky like ghosts escaping confinement. Somewhere above, the fire alarm blared uselessly. No one had seen who started it, but Colt didn't need a witness. He already knew. This wasn't a warning anymore. It was a message. The people after him weren't trying to scare him, they were cleaning up. He stood steadying himself with the cane and moved toward the street. The metal tag felt heavy in his pocket, almost hot to the touch. He flagged down a cab with his free hand, ignoring the driver's startled expression when he saw the soot on his face. "Where to?" the man asked. North, Colt said simply. "Just drive." The cab pulled away from the curb as the fire engine sirens began to wail in the distance. Colt looked out the back window. Flames reflected in the glass, swallowing the last piece of his old life. He'd lived quietly for years, trying to forget what war had made of him. Now it had followed him home, wearing new faces. He pulled the tag from his pocket, turning it in the dim taxi light. There was something else he hadn't noticed before. Faint etching along the inner rim, invisible under normal light. He rubbed it with his thumb, the characters clearer now. Coldbrook 47A. His jaw clenched. The coordinates weren't just random. They marked a specific building, a specific storage unit, the one Rourke must have died protecting. "So that's where this ends," he muttered. Ranger stirred weakly on his lap, pressing his nose against Colt's wrist. "Don't worry, kid," Colt whispered. "We're almost there." The cab reached the city's edge an hour later, headlights slicing through fog as the skyline disappeared behind them. The driver kept glancing at him in the mirror, but said nothing. Colt watched the road ahead, the trees thickening into forest silhouettes. He knew they were being followed. A black SUV had appeared 2 turns back, keeping a careful distance. Old habits returned easily, counting reflections, noting speed, memorizing license plate fragments. He leaned forward slightly. "Change route," he told the driver. "Take the next left. Dirt road." The man hesitated. "That's not on the map." Colt's eyes flicked up, cold and steady. "It's not supposed to be." The driver swallowed and obeyed. Snow began to fall again as they turned off the main highway. Colt watched the SUV pass the intersection, slowing, as if uncertain, then continuing straight. "Good," he whispered. "That buys us time." Ranger whimpered softly, and Colt scratched behind his ear. "You hang in there. We've got work to do." The cab stopped near an abandoned service station. Colt paid in cash, thanked the driver, and stepped out into the quiet. The wind howled through broken windows and skeletal trees. Somewhere far off, an owl called. He adjusted the scarf around Ranger and started walking toward the woods. The road behind him disappeared under falling snow, erasing footprints almost as soon as they formed. Colt Mercer had been driving for hours, eyes gritty, one hand on the wheel, and the other resting gently over the blanket where Ranger slept, curled on the passenger seat. The small dog hadn't made a sound since they'd fled. The fire only opened his eyes occasionally to look at Colt, as if to ask whether they were still safe. Colt didn't answer. Safety had stopped being real the moment his apartment went up in flames. The coordinates burned in his mind like a map drawn in blood. He kept replaying the way the numbers had aligned, how the faint engraving inside the tag Coldbrook 47A had matched the abandoned storage yard north of the city. Every instinct screamed that whatever waited there was the reason Rourke had died, the reason someone was burning evidence. And now, somehow, a half-starved puppy had become the living key to unlocking it. The truck Deacon had lent him sputtered against the cold. Colt kept his eyes on the snow-blown road, the headlights cutting narrow cones through the dark. The woods grew thicker the night, deeper, until even the radio static began to fade. Somewhere behind them, maybe miles back, another set of headlights appeared briefly, before vanishing again. He didn't mention it to Ranger. The pup was shivering enough already. Colt turned onto the dirt access road marked by a half-buried sign that read, U.S. Army Logistics Division authorized personnel only. The letters were faded, the paint chipped, but the presence it gave off was unmistakable. This was no ordinary abandoned site. He parked behind a stand of pines and killed the engine. The silence that followed felt absolute. He pulled on his gloves, zipped his coat, and lifted Ranger into his arms. The air stung his throat as he stepped out, boots crunching in the snow. Ahead through the mist, the faint outline of the facility, emerged a cluster of low concrete buildings surrounded by rusted fencing. Beyond the perimeter, motionless watchtowers stood like frozen sentinels. A few red indicator lights still blinked weakly in the dark. "Dead place, my ass," Colt muttered. He moved low, careful, his steps silent. Ranger whined softly, pressing closer to his chest. Colt scanned the ground. The snow was uneven, broken in places by long, deliberate tracks, tire marks that couldn't have been more than a few hours old. He followed them along the fence until he found a section where the chain link had been cut clean. Someone had been here before him, maybe still was. He ducked through the opening cane tucked under his arm and made for the nearest building. The door hung crooked half off its hinges, creaking faintly in the wind. Inside smelled of dust oil and rusted metal. Rows of storage crates stretched into the darkness. Old military tags dangled from handles, numbers, barcodes, no explanations. He moved carefully between them, flashlight sweeping across faded hazard symbols. The place wasn't just abandoned, it had been erased. Every label scratched out, every file burned. Still, the air carried something else, something sterile and clinical. The walls bore faint streaks of white paint beneath the dust medical white. Colt frowned. "Logistics, huh?" he whispered. "You were moving more than ammo." He set Ranger down briefly, letting the pup sniff around. That's when the small dog stopped and began pawing at the corner of a crate, whining. Colt crouched beside him. The crate's latch was rusted shut, but the metal was weak. He jammed his knife under it and pried until it snapped. Inside lay a jumble of equipment syringes sealed in glass plastic vials, filled with amber liquid, and folders wrapped in a faded blue band stamped "Property of Project Argos." Colt felt his pulse spike. He recognized the code name. Argos had been whispered during his last year of service, a black-budget operation rumored to combine biotech and neural warfare. No one ever confirmed it, and those who asked too much disappeared into medical discharge. He reached for the folder, flipping it open. Photographs spilled out dogs in sterile cages, their fur-shaved eyes wide and terrified. Next to each picture were charts showing neural patterns, exposure levels, and something labeled Serum RX variant. The last photo stopped him cold. It was of a brown puppy with a scar over its paw, barely a month old, labeled Specimen 47A, Handler Rourke. Ranger gave a small bark tail, twitching uncertainly. Colt's hands trembled as he looked from the photo to the living animal beside him. "Jesus Christ," he whispered. "They tested on you." He turned the page. There, in Rourke's handwriting, were notes dated 3 years after Colt had left the service. "Specimen stable. Intelligence beyond baseline. Responds to voice and visual memory. Must protect subject. They know what I took." The last line was underlined twice. "If I don't make it find Colt Mercer." Colt's breath caught. He stared at the words until they blurred. His old commander hadn't been writing a report. He'd been writing a message. Rourke had stolen something proof of the Argos experiments and hidden it inside the only witness they'd never suspect a dog. The tag, the data, everything led here. A faint sound pulled Colt from his thoughts. Mechanical whirring. He spun toward the doorway. Flashlight slicing across the room. A drone, an old recon unit still operational, hovered just outside the threshold, its red sensor light scanning. Colt killed the flashlight instantly and pressed against the wall, heart pounding. The drone drifted closer, camera rotating. Ranger growled softly. Colt placed a hand over his snout, whispering not a sound. The drone paused, then swept its beam across the floor. When it reached the open crate, it beeped twice in alert. "Damn it," Colt muttered under his breath. He grabbed the folder, stuffed it into his coat, scooped up Ranger, and darted toward the opposite end of the warehouse. The drone spun its motors, whining louder. Colt ducked behind another crate, breathing hard. A faint flash flickered behind him, followed by the crack of a stun round hitting metal. The bastards had automated defense protocols still active. He moved quickly, staying low, weaving through the rows until he spotted a door marked "Control Room Authorized Personnel Only." He shoved it open and slammed it behind him, bolting the latch. The room was small, lined with dead monitors, and a single console flickering weakly to life. He set Ranger down and began scanning the panels. Most were fried, but one display still worked, looping a corrupted video feed. He hit playback. The screen flickered static, clearing just enough to reveal a familiar face, Miles Rourke, older eyes hollow. The timestamp read 5 years ago. "If you're seeing this," Rourke said, voice shaking slightly. "Then I failed. Project Argos didn't end. It moved underground. They're using canine neural patterns to transport encrypted data, piggybacking intelligence through biological signatures. The serum creates memory carriers that can't be traced digitally." He coughed, glancing off camera. "They'll come for the subjects, and anyone who knows. The last carrier unit 47A is the key. Protect him. Don't let them find him. They'll burn everything to cover this." The feed cut to static, then black. Colt stared at the screen, every muscle rigid. Ranger whimpered, pressing against his leg. Colt looked down at him, understanding now that the small heartbeat he'd saved from the trash wasn't a coincidence. It was the last living proof of a crime buried under classified reports. The sound of engines outside snapped him back to the present. Multiple vehicles. He looked through the narrow window headlights, slicing through the fog. They were here. The men from the van, more of them now sweeping the compound with flashlights. Colt grabbed his pistol, checked the chamber, and whispered, "Time to move, soldier." He opened the back door, slipping into the cold. Again, Ranger tucked inside his jacket. Snow whipped around them, the darkness alive with noise and danger. The facility loomed behind him, full of ghosts and answers he couldn't yet afford to face. For now, survival was the only mission. He moved toward the tree line, each step crunching softly over the snow, his breath white and fast. The cold bit at his lungs and his knee screamed with every step, but he didn't stop. The only warmth came from the small, trembling weight inside his jacket Ranger pressed against his chest, his heartbeat fluttering fast and terrified. "We're not dying out here," Colt muttered between breaths. "Not tonight." The wind rose, scattering snow into a blinding haze that cloaked their escape. By the time he reached the ridge overlooking the valley, the headlights below had begun to fade, swallowed by the storm. He waited crouched behind a fallen tree until the forest went silent again. Only then did he move. He spotted a narrow trail cutting into the woods and followed it for nearly an hour until a small cabin appeared, its roof sagging under snow windows, frosted but intact. Smoke stains blackened the chimney, but no footprints marked the surrounding ground. Colt approached cautiously, pistol drawn, scanning the perimeter before pushing open the door. It creaked like a dying hinge. Inside, dust hung thick in the air. Old furniture leaned against cracked walls, and a rusted stove stood in the corner. It wasn't much, but it was shelter. He set Ranger down gently on a threadbare blanket and shut the door behind him. The little dog sniffed the air, then curled into a corner near the stove. Colt searched the shelves, found a box of matches, and coaxed a fire to life with bits of splintered wood. The flame caught slow, flickering weakly, then grew into a steady glow that filled the room with faint orange warmth. He slumped beside it, exhaustion catching up. The folder from Colebrook sat heavy in his coat pocket, its secrets burning hotter than the fire. He pulled it out and laid it open across his knees. Rourke's notes, the photographs, the serum vials, each one another nail in the coffin of a past he couldn't bury. "They built you," he whispered to Ranger, voice barely audible. And Rourke died, trying to unbuild them. He didn't notice the crunch of snow outside until Ranger's ears twitched. The dog lifted his head, growled low, a sound more instinct than strength. Colt froze, the old reflex taking over. He blew out the lamp, plunging the cabin into shadow, then drew his pistol, aiming it toward the window. The footsteps drew closer, slow, deliberate, unhurried. Someone who wasn't afraid. A silhouette passed across the frosted glass. Then a soft knock echoed through the silence. Colt didn't answer. Another knock, harder this time. A woman's voice came from outside, calm and measured. "Mr. Mercer, please, I'm not here to hurt you." His grip tightened. The tone was familiar, haunting. "You've got about 10 seconds to tell me why I shouldn't put a bullet through the door." A pause then. "Because I saved you once already." Colt frowned. He stepped forward, still keeping the gun trained. "Who are you?" The door creaked open slowly, revealing a figure cloaked in snow, a woman in her 30s, pale eyes, sharp but weary. It took him a second to recognize her. The woman from the apartment door, the one who'd pretended to be Ranger's owner. Only now she looked different. No fake tears, no soft pleading, just purpose. Colt aimed higher. "You've got nerve showing up again." She raised her hands. "You're not the only one they're hunting." The firelight caught her face, illuminating a scar along her jaw and the faint tremor in her fingers. "Name's Lyra Vance. I used to work for Argos. Colt didn't lower the gun. Used to." She gave a bitter smile. "Until I realized what they were doing. I helped develop the neural carrier serum. Thought we were saving soldiers from trauma, rewriting bad memories. Turns out we were storing data inside living creatures. They used dogs first. When Rourke found out, he took your dog and ran. Colt's chest tightened. Ranger. She nodded. He was Prototype 47, their most stable subject. His neural patterns hold encrypted coordinates to Argos's remaining data vaults. You've got what they want, but you don't understand what you're carrying. If they extract that data, they'll restart everything. Colt's mind spun. He gestured with the pistol. And what do you want? Because last time you showed up, you weren't exactly on my side. Lyra's jaw clenched. I had orders then. They said you were just another loose end. But when they torched your place, I knew they'd crossed a line. I didn't sign up to kill civilians or dogs. She looked at Ranger, whose fur caught the flicker of the firelight. He's not just carrying files, Mercer. That serum inside him, if it's triggered, it'll kill him. You've got maybe a week before it degrades and activates. Colt felt his throat tighten. You're saying he's a time bomb. She nodded grimly. One that's coded to his heartbeat. When it stops, the data activates remotely. That's why they want him alive. He's the lock and the key. Colt holstered the pistol slowly, his mind racing through possibilities. You can stop it. Lyra hesitated. Maybe. But I'd need access to Argos's original servers. They're deep in the vault, under Coldbrook. I can't get in alone. Colt studied her, the silence stretching. She met his gaze steadily. You think I'm lying fine, but when he starts convulsing, you'll remember I tried to help. Ranger whimpered softly as if sensing the tension. Colt exhaled hard. If I take you back there, how do I know you won't hand us over? Her expression softened. Because they burned me too. My sister was one of their test subjects. I've been running ever since. The tremor in her voice wasn't fake. Colt had heard enough confessions in war to know when someone was speaking from a wound that never healed. He lowered the weapon. All right, Lyra. You get us in. We find those servers and you make sure that serum never triggers. After that, I'm done with this. Outside, wind howled through the trees carrying distant sounds, engines again faint but growing. Lyra glanced toward the window. They found us faster than I thought. Colt moved to the door, looking out into the black. Flashlights bobbed in the distance, weaving through the snow. How many 3 vehicles? Maybe more, she said, already checking the magazine of her sidearm. They don't take prisoners. Colt grabbed the folder, stuffed it back into his coat, and slung his bag over his shoulder. Then we're moving now. He whistled softly. Ranger limped to his side, still weak but alert. The fire sputtered behind them as Colt pushed open the back door, the cold slamming into them like a wall. There's an old tunnel east of here, Lyra shouted over the wind. It connects to the drainage system below Coldbrook. It'll get us in. Colt nodded eyes, scanning the tree line. Then lead the way. They moved through the snow like shadows, the forest alive with noise behind them. Colt didn't look back at the cabin until the flames from their abandoned fire began to glow brighter. Someone had already reached it. He gritted his teeth and pushed forward, keeping close to Lyra's silhouette ahead. Ranger stumbled once, and Colt scooped him up again, pressing him against his chest. The pup's breathing came shallow, quick, but he didn't stop moving. When they reached the frozen riverbed, Lyra pointed toward a cluster of rocks. There, she whispered. Beneath them, half buried under ice, was a rusted grate, barely wide enough for one person to crawl through. Colt stared at it, then back towards the forest, where flashlights now cut through the dark. Ladies first, he said. Lyra managed a grim smile. You really are the last gentleman. Lyra moved ahead, her flashlight beam trembling over rusted pipes and broken signs that still bore the faded insignia of the army. Ranger's soft whimper was the only reminder of life in that suffocating dark. Every few minutes, Colt stopped listening for pursuit, but all he heard was the low hum of wind squeezing through the cracks above. They had been crawling for nearly an hour since slipping into the grate, and the air was getting colder, thicker with decay. How much farther? Colt muttered. 1/2 mile, Lyra answered, her voice distant in the dark. The drainage connects to the secondary access tunnel under Building 3. The main lab's above that. Colt shifted the puppy in his arm, rubbing the frost off its fur. You said that serum inside him could trigger. How long do we have? Lyra hesitated. Maybe less than a week. Maybe less. Depends on exposure. He's been through shock fire stress. The more his heart rate spikes, the faster it degrades. Colt's jaw tightened. Then we move faster. They reached a steel door marked with peeling yellow paint. A control panel beside it blinked faintly, running on backup power. Lyra crouched, brushing away dust from the keypad. "Still active," she whispered. "Help me pry the casing off." Colt wedged the tip of his knife under the edge and popped it loose. Wires dangled like veins. Lyra pulled a small device from her pack and clipped it to the panel. The screen flickered, then displayed a prompt "User override required." She began typing fingers, moving quick and sure. Colt noticed the precision in her motion, the kind of confidence that came from years of doing something dangerous for the wrong side. "How long were you with them?" he asked. "Too long," she said. "I thought we were building something to heal minds. We were supposed to erase trauma. But once they realized they could record consciousness instead of destroy it, everything changed." Her tone cracked on that last word, the edge of guilt slicing through. "You didn't just store data," Colt said quietly. "You stored people." The lock clicked. Lyra met his eyes, a flicker of sorrow there. "Open it," she said. They pushed through. The air inside was colder still, carrying the sterile tang of metal and rot. Emergency lights glowed faintly along the corridor, painting everything in dull red. Rows of empty cages lined the walls. Colt's stomach twisted as he moved past them. Scratch marks scored the concrete floors, deep and desperate. Ranger pressed close to his chest, tail tucked tight. "They kept them here," Colt said, voice low. "The test subjects." Lyra didn't answer. Her flashlight flicked across the far end of the hall, where a sealed glass door led into a control chamber. "That's where the servers should be," she said. "Once I access the system, I can neutralize the serum's trigger." She knelt by the door console and began working again. Colt stayed alert, scanning the corridor, but something about her movements made him pause. Her left wrist glinted briefly, a small metallic band flashing a red pulse beneath her sleeve. It wasn't jewelry, it looked like a transmitter. Colt frowned. "What's that on your wrist?" he asked. Lyra froze. "It's nothing," she said quickly. "Monitor for my vitals. I can't risk exposure to the old chemicals." But she avoided his gaze. Colt stepped closer, eyes narrowing. "That's a tracking band, isn't it?" She stayed silent for a beat too long. The realization hit hard. "They're following you." Lyra looked up at him, eyes wide and pained. "I didn't have a choice. They put it on me after I defected. Said if I didn't bring back the data, they'd find me anyway." Colt felt anger rise sharp in his throat. "So you led them right to us." "I didn't mean to," she said. "It activates every few hours, pings the last known location. I jammed the signal before, but the closer we got to Coldbrook, the stronger it got. I think that they've already locked on." Ranger barked softly, sensing the tension. Colt forced his breathing steady. "Then we finish this before they get here," he said. "And if you're lying, I'll know." Lyra nodded, swallowing hard. "I'm not lying, Colt. I want this over as much as you do." The door hissed open. Inside, the main lab spread out like a tomb. Broken consoles flickered sporadically, and dust swirled in the air. In the center stood a sealed glass chamber filled with rows of dormant servers, each one labeled with a number and a name. Colt's light swept across one label, M. Rourke. His pulse jumped. "You see this?" he whispered. Lyra looked over, confusion in her face. "That's impossible. They deleted everything before they evacuated." Colt pressed his hand against the glass, staring at the faint shape of a drive cluster behind it. "Rourke's here. Or at least part of him." Lyra typed frantically at a side console. "If his data's intact, it could help me disarm the serum." The screen blinked to life, text scrolling across. Then a distorted voice filled the room, weak but familiar. "Colt, if you found this, it means I'm gone." Colt froze. Ranger lifted his head, ears twitching. The voice continued, warped by static. "They turned the project into something monstrous. But I copied myself, everything I knew, every memory into the carrier serum. That's why they'll never stop chasing it. The data isn't just information, it's me." Colt felt the ground shift beneath him. "You're telling me he's inside the dog," he said, stunned. Lyra stared at the console, disbelief etched on her face. It's a neural imprint, partial consciousness encoded within the biochemical matrix. If it's true, Rourke isn't dead. He's alive in fragmented form inside Ranger's neural network. The voice crackled again. Protect him, Colt. He'll lead you to what we lost. Don't let them take him. If they do, they'll erase me and everything I did to stop them. The transmission ended abruptly, plunging the room into heavy silence. For a long moment, Colt didn't move. The reality of it pressed down like weight. The dog at his feet wasn't just a survivor, it was a vessel carrying the mind of a man who had saved his life years ago. Ranger whimpered, pawing at his boot, as if sensing the ghost within. Colt crouched and stroked his fur gently. "You really are a soldier, aren't you?" he whispered. Before Lyra could respond, a shrill alarm split the silence. The red light on her wristband flashed violently, emitting a pulse that filled the room with electronic whine. "They found us," she gasped. "Signal breached." Colt grabbed his pistol, eyes scanning the hallway. "How long minutes?" she said, ripping the band off her wrist and smashing it against the floor. "They'll be right on top of us." The hum of engines echoed faintly through the ventilation shafts, growing louder. Colt turned back to the glass chamber. "Can you download what's left of Rourke's file?" "Maybe she said already working, but it'll take time." Colt moved to the door, checking his weapon. Then by it. He aimed down the hallway as footsteps thundered closer. The first bullet shattered the glass door. He fired back, the shot echoing like thunder. Ranger barked, darting behind a desk. Lyra typed faster, sweat streaking her temple. Almost there, she shouted. "Colt, when I say run, you run." The console beeped once, then went dark. Lyra yanked a small data drive from the slot and tossed it to Colt. "Got it." He caught it, pocketing it without question. "Now what?" "Now we disappear," she said. She grabbed Ranger, wrapping him in her coat, and sprinted toward the emergency hatch on the far wall. Colt covered her, firing until the clip clicked empty. He slammed the hatch behind them just as the corridor erupted with gunfire. The data drive in his pocket pressed against his ribs, with every stride heavier than any weapon he had ever carried. Lyra ran ahead, half stumbling, one hand clutched to her side, where her coat was torn. Ranger, wrapped in the remnants of her scarf, whimpered faintly as Colt held him against his chest. Snow whipped through the pines, erasing their footprints even as they formed. Behind them, flashlights flickered in the distance, Argos soldiers moving in formation, precise, relentless. Colt's mind worked like an old machine that had never forgotten its rhythm. He counted the pursuers by their spacing, gauged their pace by their echo. 10 men, maybe 12. He could lose them, but not out here in the open. He needed ground, he understood. "Left," Lyra gasped, pointing through the trees. "There's an old ranger station half a mile ahead. Radio tower should still be standing." Colt nodded without looking. His breath fogged in front of him, the cold slicing into his chest like glass. "You holding up?" he asked. "I've been worse," she said, but her voice betrayed the lie. He saw the way her steps faltered, the way her hand trembled as she pushed through the branches. "You're bleeding," he said. "We'll fix it when we get there," she muttered, forcing a grim smile. "If we get there?" Colt didn't answer. He just kept moving, scanning the trees for the silhouette of the tower. When it finally appeared through the snow, the sight brought a rush of bitter relief. A wooden structure leaning against the slope windows shattered, the antenna rusted and bent. It was barely standing, but it was shelter. Colt reached the door first, shoulder-checking it open. The hinges screamed. Inside smelled of mold and old smoke. He set Ranger down and swept the room, checking corners, windows, and ceiling beams. Empty. Lyra staggered in behind him and collapsed against the wall. "We can hold here for a bit," Colt said, locking the door with a broken chair leg. "How bad is it?" She lifted her hand, revealing a dark stain spreading through her coat. "Grazed, maybe," she said. Colt crouched beside her, peeled back the fabric, and saw the truth. A deep slice from shrapnel, not a graze. Blood welled slow, but steady. "You'll need stitches," he muttered. "Add it to the list," she said, trying to laugh, but failing halfway through. Colt moved to the window, parting the dusty curtain. Through the snow, he saw faint red dots weaving through the forest. They were sweeping the area in grid formation. "They're closing in fast," he said. "We've got 20 minutes, maybe less." Lyra looked at him, eyes hollow, but determined. "You still have the drive?" He tapped his pocket. "Yeah, but it's encrypted." He pulled it out and turning it over in his hand. The casing was scratched but intact. Rourke must have coded it to a specific key. Lyra nodded weakly. "He trusted you more than anyone. Try your ID." Colt blinked. "My ID, I haven't used that in years." He would have known that, she said. He'd make sure only you could open it. Colt knelt by the dusty desk and powered on the old laptop he'd scavenged from the lab. The battery still held a faint charge. He inserted the drive, the screen flickering to life. A prompt appeared. "Enter authorization code Mercer Delta." He hesitated only a second before typing his service ID, the numbers rolling off his fingertips like a prayer he never meant to remember. The screen blinked, loading a single file, labeled Project Argos Final Archive. He clicked it. The screen filled with text, encrypted strings scrolling fast before rearranging into readable lines. At the top was a name, Captain Miles Rourke, classified addendum. Colt's breath caught as the voice recording began automatically. "If you're reading this," Colt Rourke's voice said low and steady, "then you're exactly where I thought you'd be. The Argos serum wasn't just a storage medium, it's a living network. I built it from fragments of my own neural map to hide the key to shutting Argos down. The consciousness in Ranger, it's part of me, but incomplete. The full sequence to erase Argos's research is in the file you're holding. They can't decrypt it without you. But be warned, the system was designed to self-destruct if accessed remotely. Once you use it, you'll have 1 hour to destroy the host, or they'll rebuild it." The message ended, replaced by a string of coordinates and commands. Colt stared at the screen, the weight of the decision settling in like frost. To end Argos, he'd have to risk the very creature carrying the last piece of his friend's mind. "He gave you a choice," Lyra said quietly. "Save the dog, or end the program." Colt rubbed his forehead. "No," he said. "He gave me a mission." He closed the laptop and stood. "We need to move before those soldiers box us in." A sharp crack split the air, the sound of glass shattering. A bullet tore through the window, burying itself in the wall behind them. Lyra ducked, groaning as pain ripped through her side. Colt grabbed the pistol from his belt and fired 2 shots toward the tree line, then pulled her to the floor. "They've found us," he shouted. The next volley came from the back wall. The Argos soldiers were surrounding the cabin. Colt moved fast, overturning the table to create cover. "Stay down," he ordered. Ranger barked low and fierce ears pinned back. Lyra tried to raise her weapon, but her hands shook. "They'll come through the side door," she gasped. Colt nodded grimly. "Then we'll greet them." He waited until he heard the faint crunch of boots outside, then fired 3 quick rounds through the wall. A cry answered him. He shifted positions, crawling low as bullets splintered the wood around them. Smoke filled the air, mixing with dust and the metallic tang of blood. When the shooting paused, Colt moved to the back door, crouched, and kicked it open. The flash of snow blinded him for a moment, but his instincts found targets faster than his eyes did. He shot one man at the edge of the clearing, ducked behind the rail, then threw a flare from his pack into the opposite direction. The soldiers turned toward the red light, and Colt used the distraction to drag Lyra outside. "Move," he shouted. She staggered beside him, clutching her wound. Ranger followed, limping but determined. The night exploded with gunfire behind them as they dove into the trees. The flare burned bright, painting the forest in violent color. Colt ran until his lungs ached, until the only sound was the crunch of their boots and the ragged rhythm of survival. When they finally stopped near a frozen creek, Colt dropped to one knee, catching his breath. Lyra sank to the ground, blood staining the snow around her. He looked at her wound. It was worse now, the edges blackened slightly, veins around it discolored. "That's not from the bullet," he said sharply. "What is that?" She looked at him, eyes tired. "Serum exposure? I got some of it on me back at the lab when the vial broke." How long, he demanded. "A day, maybe 2, she said softly. It's already in my bloodstream. Colt clenched his jaw, rage and grief rising together. There's got to be a way to stop it. She shook her head. There isn't. But you can still stop them. Use the data. Finish what Rourke started. Ranger whimpered, nudging her hand with his nose. Lyra smiled weakly and stroked his fur. You did good, little one. You made it farther than any of us. Colt stared at her for a long moment, the storm around them whispering through the pines. Then he took her hand, gripping it firmly. You're not dying here, he said, his voice low and final. Not until this is done. She smiled faintly. Then we better hurry. In the distance, faint headlights moved again, Argos regrouping. The chase wasn't over. Colt looked down at Ranger, the drive in his pocket, and the dying woman beside him. He felt the weight of Rourke's words like a ghost in his ear. 1 hour to destroy the host. He exhaled hard, the choice forming in his mind like the click of a trigger. All right, Miles, he whispered. Let's end this your way. The forest was silent, except for the wind carving through the trees like whispers of ghosts. Dawn crept over the horizon, pale and bruised, painting the world in shades of gray. Colt Mercer trudged through the snow, every step heavier than the last. Ranger nestled weakly inside his coat, and Lyra leaning against his shoulder, her breath shallow but steady. Behind them, the faint glow of burning trees marked the aftermath of the firefight that had cost them everything but their purpose. The coordinates from Rourke's file burned in Colt's mind, guiding them toward the final tower of Project Argos, the main control hub hidden beneath a decommissioned satellite dish on the northern ridge. If they could reach it and upload the file, Argos would be erased from every server, every shadow network, every corner of the digital world. But the cost... He already felt it before seeing the end of the road. The snow gave way to concrete as they crested the ridge. The tower stood alone, skeletal and silent, its metal ribs blackened with age, its dish half collapsed toward the horizon. The entrance was a narrow service hatch marked Restricted Access. Colt pried it open, helping Lyra inside first, then sliding down the rusted ladder, with Ranger tucked safely against his chest. They landed in a dim corridor lined with inactive monitors and dormant servers humming faintly with backup power. We made it, Lyra whispered, voice trembling. This is it. Colt looked at her pale face and nodded. You stay here. Patch yourself up as best you can. I'll finish this. She grabbed his arm before he could move. When you activate the sequence, she said there's no reversing it. The program will wipe every trace, including the serum pattern. That means Ranger's code, the consciousness inside him, won't survive. Colt froze the weight of her words, sinking like ice water in his veins. You're saying it'll kill him? Lyra nodded weakly. It's the only way. The serum's part of the system. He's tied to it. Colt looked down at the little dog in his arms, his fur, dirty eyes, dull but full of trust. The same trust that had led him out of that alley on Christmas Eve, through fire, through gunfire, through hell itself. He thought of Rourke's message, the way his voice cracked when he said protect him. He realized now that Rourke hadn't meant just protect the animal. He meant protect what humanity was left in a world that had forgotten it. He's just a dog, Colt whispered, though the lie burned his throat. Lyra smiled faintly. You don't believe that anymore. They reached the core room, a vast circular chamber with a single terminal, glowing at its center. The walls were lined with rows of dormant machines, stretching upward like the ribs of some ancient beast. Colt set Ranger down gently on the console platform. The pup whimpered once, then licked his hand as if telling him it was all right. Colt inserted the drive into the terminal. The screen flickered, displaying the Argos insignia, a triangle of light, and then a prompt, Final Authorization Required. Below it, Rourke's recorded voice echoed faintly through the chamber, Colt Mercer Authorization Code Delta 7. Colt swallowed hard and entered the command. The system processed, then displayed one last message. Warning, neural host termination required to complete purge. Proceed. His hands hovered over the keys, trembling. He looked down at Ranger, whose tail gave a faint twitch. "You hear that, buddy?" Colt said softly. "They're saying I gotta lose you to finish this. After everything, after everyone we lost, you're the last damn thing that makes this world bearable." His voice broke something it hadn't done in years. Ranger tilted his head eyes soft, a quiet understanding in them that made Colt's chest ache. "Rourke built you to carry what he couldn't," Colt said. "But he never meant for you to die like this." Lyra coughed behind him, her strength fading fast. "Colt," she whispered, "you have to choose. If you walk away, they'll rebuild. Argos will rise again. They'll make more of him, more suffering, more lies. You know what Rourke would do." Colt's eyes filled with tears he refused to let fall. "Rourke isn't here," he said. "Just me. Just us." He turned back to the screen, the blinking cursor waiting like judgment. His finger hovered over the key. He wanted to do it. He wanted to end this nightmare. But the thought of Ranger's heartbeat stopping, of that small warmth disappearing forever, it froze him. He slammed his fist against the console in frustration. Damn it! The sound echoed off the walls. Ranger startled, then limped closer, placing his paw gently on Colt's arm. The touch stopped him cold. The dog looked up at him with a steadiness that felt older than any creature should carry. For a moment, Colt swore he saw Rourke's gaze staring back through those amber eyes. The puppy barked once softly, then turned his head toward the terminal and pressed his paw against the enter key. The room filled with light. Alarms blared, systems screamed, data cascaded across the screens like a waterfall of static. The floor vibrated as the servers began to melt from the inside out. Lyra gasped, covering her face as the bright flare washed over them. "He did it," she whispered. Colt stared in disbelief. "Ranger, no." The pup stumbled backwards, his small body trembling violently. Colt dropped to his knees, scooping him up. "Hold on, buddy. Hold on." But he could feel it, the fading pulse, the quiet surrender. Ranger's breathing slowed, eyes dimming, yet there was peace in them. The light from the terminal reflected off his fur like a halo. He licked Colt's chin once, a final gesture of trust, then went still in his arms. The system's voice echoed one last time through the speakers, Argos deactivated. All data purged. Then silence. Absolute and heavy. The red glow of the room dimmed to gray. Lyra knelt nearby, tears streaking the soot on her face. "It's over," she said softly. Colt couldn't answer. He held the tiny body close to his chest, rocking slightly, his breath shuddering. The storm outside howled louder wind seeping through the cracks, carrying the scent of cold and ash. He pressed his forehead against Ranger's and whispered, "You did good, soldier. You did what I couldn't." Hours passed before the fire outside the facility died down. Colt buried Ranger at the edge of the clearing beneath a small pine tree, wrapping him in the scarf that once kept him warm. Lyra stood beside him, leaning weakly against a crutch fashioned from Colt's broken cane. Dawn stretched across the sky, breaking the clouds apart. The first sunlight in days washed over the snow, turning it gold. Colt stared at the horizon, his heart hollow but alive. "He saved more than data," he said quietly. "He saved what's left of us." Lyra nodded. "Maybe that's what Rourke wanted to remind us, that life's worth fighting for, even when it hurts." She looked at him. "What will you do now?" Colt stared down at the fresh mound of snow. "Keep his promise," he said. "Build something better." They turned away together, leaving the tower smoldering behind them, a graveyard of wires and ghosts. As they walked toward the long road south, Colt glanced back one last time. A faint glimmer shone from the pine's branches where Ranger lay buried like a single heartbeat of light, refusing to fade. He smiled, the first true smile in years. "Rest easy, partner," he murmured. "You earned your peace." The wind carried his words into the trees, scattering them across the snow. The world was quiet again, but not empty. Somewhere inside that silence, hope had survived the fire. The end. If this story moved, you don't forget to like, share, and subscribe for more stories that stay with your heart. Tell us where you're watching from, and what moment in Colt and Ranger's journey hit you the hardest. Your thoughts keep these stories alive.